right after. Well, I'll go back to Gene's folks. Years ago, there was a fella here in Janesville by the name of Bob McMasters. He was the juvenile officer for young boys who got in trouble at school, and maybe they got in trouble in the community, and they would be sent to a prison for boys in Waukesha, and I think it was Waukesha, or it was called Wales, and well, maybe it was in Wales. Uh, there is a town over by Milwaukee named Wales, and this prison for boys was there, and that was kind of the last stop for kids who really got in a lot of trouble, and so. Gene's folks used to keep these kids or bring them out to the farm, and they would stay on the farm and stay right at the house, and it was the last stop before Wales. In other words, they'd maybe been in prison, they'd maybe been in detention, uh, maybe several times, and then the final stop was if you go out to the farm and you mess up there, then you're going to prison. I mean, it was kind of the last stop. And so there were several boys before Gene and I got married that they were with her folks, and they worked out on the farm and worked with this Bob McMasters. He was for all of Rock County, so he would bring these boys out. Well, after we got married, we didn't have any for quite a while. I mean, we didn't. But then he came to us and said, "Would you be willing to consider taking some of these boys, and would you be a?" They had certain farms in Rock County that were designated as to where these boys could go, because they felt like, well, first they get out on the farm, they're kind of away from where they can get into trouble, and so we started taking these boys. I think it was about 1961, 62. Now, we'd been married probably all close to 10 years before we started that. We already had 3 kids, and I think Cheryl was born when David came, but I'm just going to tell you the story of maybe a couple of them. David came, and he was probably in his freshman year of high school, and he was one of the smartest kids I ever got in contact with. They brought him out, and the way it worked is the kids would come out. We had total authority over them, and if we permitted them, they could go home, because most of them had relatives, homes, in Rock County, but they had reached a point where they couldn't be at home because they couldn't be trusted at home, and their parents couldn't do anything with them. So as a last stop, they'd bring them to the farm. Well, we had, I think, a couple, and then we got David. When he came with a shoebox, and the shoebox had everything that he owned in it. I mean, everything. He came with no clothes, just one pair of clothes in the shoebox, and he had the clothes and the shoes on his feet. There was a couple pair of socks in there, and that's all the clothes he had. Well, we had to get clothes for him, and so he came, and he came to live with us, and he was a rather unique young man. He was very strong, and he was very smart. In fact, he was so smart, it was to his detriment. He had a very high IQ. In fact, it was so high that school was absolutely boring to him. He'd go to school, and he'd frankly get bored in school. So then he'd start making trouble. And boy, could he make trouble. And he just thrived on making trouble in the schools. And and that was the only place he could go because they were grounded. They couldn't go anywhere other than with us. So he would go to church with us, and he would just raise Cain in church. That was he just really enjoyed that. He'd go to Sunday school and he just raised Cain. In fact, the pastor came and talked to us, and they said, "Boy, this is really a problem." He said, "We want to love this boy, but he is just creating such a a lot of chaos in church." He says, "I don't know whether we can manage or not." And of course, he would go to class, but then he'd raise Cain in class. And I mean, I was the FMY director, Free Methodist Youth Director at that time, and so I was kind of taking care of the youth at the church. Well, he was part of that group, and he would just he just was into everything and raising Cain. I mean, I just thought, there were times when I thought, I just can't handle this boy, but he was with us actually for 3 years. But I want to tell you the story of his development, because when he came, he had no interest in church, and we didn't dare leave him home alone. We had to take him with us everywhere we went. So he would go to church with us, and we'd go on Wednesday nights, and he would go on Sunday mornings, and if there were other events, he'd go with us. So he got pretty well acquainted. And then a very difficult situation developed in the church. The pastor's daughter kind of fell for him a little bit. She just really thought he was kind of neat. And of course, it was the pastor's daughter, and so now we had another problem on our hands. And he really liked her, and she kind of really liked him too. But we just couldn't let that develop, I mean, it just wasn't the right thing. So Dave just caused me an awful lot of trouble. Now, your dad is named. His first name is because of Dave. Gene wanted to name your dad after Dave, because Cheryl was born when David came, but your dad wasn't. And he was born after David came to live with us. And over a course of time, he started to develop into a halfway decent kid. I mean, he really started to get a little more interested in spiritual things, but not very interested, but a little bit. And at least he got to the point where we could reason with him, where he would behave himself a little bit better. And so anyway, as time went along, why, he got more and more interested in doing things. And his home was not so very good. He had his father had problems, and his mother had some problems, and so it was he just had grown up in a home where he was just kind of allowed to run, and they just couldn't control him. But he was so smart, he could figure out everything. And I'm not going to tell you all the escapades that he did, but boy, he had some dandies that he did. But one thing, he would never lie. He never ever told me a lie all the time he was with us. He was with us under our control for about 3 years. When he came out from under our control, he stayed on with us for about another year, and then he got interested in a gal that lived about 7-8 miles east of us, and he used to go and see her, but he couldn't drive, so he would walk to have a date with her. He would go and see her at her parents' house, and they weren't real excited about him because they knew his background. but this gal really fell for him, and he really liked her, and so they started to connect. And he would walk on Saturday night all the way to her to see her, and even when it was cold, or it could even be raining, he'd still get out and walk because we didn't take him. He just walked. He said, "No, I'll walk," and he would walk to her and walk home, and obviously he couldn't get very far, and he'd come back. I mean, he got to the point where we could trust him. In fact, he babysat our kids for. He got so he could stay with the kids because we could trust him. I mean, over time, he just came around to understanding a little bit more of what a home should be. Mm-hmm. So anyway, after he left us, he was with us about 3 years. After he left us, he went to and got married. He married this gal and had a little boy and named him David. And I'm not using any last names because I just don't feel that's appropriate in this situation. I haven't gotten their permission to and this will go out to a lot of people, so I'm just using first names. But anyway, he married this gal and they had a little guy and named him David. And then he came back and worked for me some more even after that. I just hired him because he was a good worker. I mean, he would, even though he did an awful lot of mischief, he was still a good worker. He wasn't afraid to work. He wasn't afraid to just get down and dirty, and he had wonderful characteristics. He was a tremendous artist. He could draw things. He drew an architectural drawing to scale. He could have gone on to architectural school, but he just felt like he wasn't good enough. He always had that feeling like he'd come out of a home and he just wasn't a good enough kid. But he really turned into quite a neat young guy. But he didn't have much interest in spiritual things. He went with us to church but it was more. I'm here to create problems more than I am to learn anything. So anyway, after he left us, finally, and he got married and had a little boy, and then he decided to go into the armed services. And at this time, the Vietnam War was at its height, and he just thought that going into the armed services was something he ought to do. He just felt like he ought to be serving his country, and so he joined the army. And I don't remember when it was that he got shipped out, but this is the part that I really want to get on record. The night that he shipped out from San Francisco to go to Vietnam, and the night that he was shipping out, he was allowed one phone call. Oh, before that, I should tell you, one of the episodes we had with him was on just before he left. It was on a Mother's Day. He came home on a Friday night, and the following Sunday was Mother's Day. And he came home on Friday night. Now, we gave him money on Monday for a hot lunch program, so he could eat at the school all week. We'd give him money so he could get hot lunch, and he should go up and pay for his hot lunch, and then he'd eat all week. And this Friday night before Mother's Day, he came home, and I will tell you that my wife really loved, Jean loved, your grandma really loved this kid. I mean, she just felt like she was going to make something out of him, and she did. I mean, he came to really be he came to be really a part of our family, and so anyway, he came home on a Friday night, and Sunday was Mother's Day, and we had told him he'd been with us. I think it was in his third year on Mother's Day, so he was getting close to being the end of his time, because when he graduated from high school, then he was to leave because he had to stay through high school because that or go to prison,
Mm-hmm.
and so he came home on the Friday night and the next Sunday was Mother's Day. He walked in the house, and he was carrying a box of chocolate-covered cherries, and he threw them on the kitchen table. We were sitting there. I was having coffee with your grandma just before going out to do chores, and he came home. He walked in the house from high school, and he took this box of chocolate-covered cherries and threw them on the table. I mean, he just kind of threw them on the table, and he said, "This is for Mother's Day." And Jean said, "Well," she said, "you're going home for Sunday to see your mother." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you want me to wrap them for you so you can give them to her as kind of a wrapped gift?" He said, "They're not for her." And Jean said, "Well, who are they for?" And I'll never forget, he turned to her and he said, "They're for you." And you had to know David, he was not an affectionate kid, never expressed himself much in the area of I like you or I don't like you. I mean, he just kind of took you as you came. And so he said, "They're for you." And she said, "Well, David, I'm not your mother." And all he said is, "You'll do," and walked away. And I never forgot that. He just said, "You'll do." and you had to know David to know that was a tremendous expression coming out of that kid, because he just was. It just, but like I said, he never lied to me. He got into all kinds of mischief, and I had to discipline him. I had to leave him in prison a few times. I had to leave him locked up over a weekend a couple times because he went out and got drunk. And I mean, but anyway, going back to, so that was, we just kind of took him under our wing, and it's, so anyway, he's out in San Francisco. He's allowed one call before he leaves. Every person that shipped out was allowed one long distance call so they could notify their whoever, their parents or whoever. So he called us. He called us. And he said, "I wanted to call you and tell you that I'm shipping out tonight." And he said, "I've got something kind of important to tell you." And Jean says, "Well, David, you're only allowed one call. You should have called your mother." "No," he said, "I wanted to call you. And we had two phones in the house, so we each got on a phone, so there were three of us talking to him, because we had a line upstairs and a line, so this was important, because we hadn't heard from him for several months, and all of a sudden we get this call, he's shipping out. Mm-hmm. And so he said, "I wanted you to know something before I left." And he said, "This is important. And if you had to know David, to know that was what he was telling you was the truth. It was important to him." So he said, "I wanted you to know that I accepted the Lord as my Savior." And he said, "I've got everything all straightened out with God." And he said, "I knew that you'd want to know that." And he said, "Would you like to know the reason why I did it?" And Gene said, yeah, I'd like to know. He said, well, it was because of you and Bob. He says, I want you to know. He said, you lived your life before me as Christians, and you loved me, and you took me in as I was, and you put up with everything I threw at you, and you still loved me. And he said, that showed me that what your God was real. And he said, so I've accepted the Lord. And I just wanted you to know that. And he was so casual in the way that was profound, you know, but it was so casual the way he said it. And he said, I'm shipping out tonight. And he said, before I leave, he says, I may never come back. And he says, if I don't, it was important for you to know that I made this decision. And he was right. He shipped out to Vietnam. And 2 weeks later, John, we got a call that he'd been killed in action. And they brought him back. And he's buried over here at Milton Lawns Cemetery. They brought him back, and he was killed in action in Vietnam. So that call really meant a lot to us, to know that, you know, to me, to know that he is today with the Lord. And what he said was, you know, it was because of the way you accepted me that caused me to make that. Your witness to me was what made me make this decision. So, you know, that was a rather profound experience in our lifetime, you know, and that wasn't the only boy, but that was the most spectacular one in my estimation, because there were a couple of other kids that we had. One was named Bob, just like my name, and the other one, I forget, Jim. Bob and Jim. There was a Jim that came, and today he lives here, and he's here in Janesville, and he is a Christian, and he's accepted the Lord because of coming to live at our home. And Bob also accepted the Lord. So we had probably a total over through the years of about 15 or 16. And then as the kids got older, you know, we had a couple of girls, and it just wasn't the right thing to do to have boys in the house like that with the girls. And so we just gave it up, you know, over time, because it got to be questionable whether it was okay to do it, you know. And so, but those three I know of that came to know the Lord, but the most profound was David, you know. And your dad is named after him, because your grandma thought it just about made her. When she lost David, it was like losing one of her own kids. She just learned to love that boy, and it was really hard on her when she got that call that he had died. We got the call from his wife that she'd gotten notified by the War Department that he had been killed in action, and then we went to his funeral, you know, and it was hard, but by the same token, it was really great that he had given us. I've been forever grateful for that call, you know, because if he hadn't called, we'd have never known that he had gotten things straightened out. So that's a rather important part of my life, you know. Now, as to the matter of the kids, interestingly enough, there's another name. Our pastor's daughter at that time, when we first came to know the Lord and we were going to church, her name was Cheryl, and she was also instrumental in the naming of Cheryl, your sister, your or your dad's sister,
Mm-hmm.
and so she was. It was the combination of the uncle that I told you about last week, and this gal. That combination that just kind of clinched it. That she wanted to name.
So what was it about the daughter that made you want to name Cheryl?
Oh, she was just such a sweet gal, and she is to this day. She's she lives over in the western part of the state now, and she was just such a wonderful gal, and so and interestingly enough, Jay, his name, Jay Eugene is the middle name after Rex, but the name Jay came from Jay Leatherman. So the pastor's name was Kent and Iona Leatherman. That's who the pastors were when we first started attending the Free Methodist Church, and Jay was the son, and Cheryl was the daughter, and Jay Leatherman was a fine young man, and that kind of caught Jean's attention when she came to naming Jay. That's how he got the name Jay. So both Jay and Eugene are names that were just not picked out of a thin air. They had a purpose behind them. So yeah, just shared that with you. So that's just those two.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay, let's talk about Cocoa Beach some.
Okay.
How'd you guys end up going down there?
Well, that was interesting. We started in I think it was 1979 or 1980, going down there. My folks lived over in Clearwater. They lived on Highway 19, and they had a trailer down there. They pulled a trailer, and they had a place that they rented down there in a trailer park, and they would pull their trailer down there and spend the winter. They started that in 1952, and but we didn't like that part of the state of Florida. But we didn't like the western part, and the reason your grandma didn't want to live down in Florida was because of the bugs in the wintertime. There were a lot of insects down there. She just hated insects of all kinds. Spiders. Oh boy, that was the end of the world for her. I mean, a spider. Kill that thing. I mean, it was that was serious trouble for a spider. But anyway, my folks lived down there from 1952 on, and we didn't. She wanted nothing to do with Florida. Well, her uncle lived in Waukesha, and he had an electrical business, and he had about 50, 60 employees, and so he called us. It was either 1979 or 1980, and he said, I'm working with a developer here in Milwaukee that is building or that is going to build some condos on the beach in Cocoa Beach, Florida. And he said it's over on the Atlantic. And he said, if you would be interested, he would give you. He bought the complex. He bought the complex. There's 2 buildings or 3 buildings there, but there's nothing on the beach. There's just 3 buildings, and it used to be a Holiday Inn. I think it was a Holiday Inn, but anyway, it doesn't make any difference. But he bought it, and he was gonna build. He was gonna build condos on the beach. Okay, so he says, why don't you just go down and spend a week and see if you like it? And because my uncle, or her uncle, was working with this developer in the electrical business in Milwaukee. So we went down there, and it was, I think it was Jay and Penny, but they weren't married, and my mother and grandma and me. So it was my mother, it was your great grandma. We went down to Florida, and we stayed in a unit off the beach because there wasn't anything on the beach. but there was one unit built on the beach that they had built what was going to be the configuration of the condos. They had built just one. It was going to be a condo 4 stories high, or 5 stories high. Yeah, it's 5 stories. And so they could, but they hadn't started yet, but they were selling them. And we got down there, and so they had this one on the beach, so you could go out and go in it, and it was just like what the condo was going to be when it was completed. Mm-hmm. Only it would be a whole bunch of units all in one building. So we went down we looked at it, and boy, your grandma just fell in love with it. And there was no bugs there because we were clear out on the ocean, and we were on actually there were 2 islands. Cocoa Beach is on an island, and so we went out and stayed, and she just loved it. All of a sudden she says, "Man, I would like to live here." And I thought to myself, holy cow, I'm going to get Grandma to Florida, because I figured I'd never get her to Florida because she never wanted to go down to, she had been down several times to visit my folks, we had been, but she just hated it. She didn't like it because she says too many bugs. But we got there, wasn't any bugs. For some reason or other, over on the Atlantic side, whether it's the ocean breezes or what, but you just don't have, you have a few, but very few insects. Anyway, so we looked at it, and she says, I want to talk to him. So we bought 11 weeks in one of the buildings that was going to be built.
So it wasn't even built yet?
Wasn't even built yet. And so we bought 11 weeks. And I thought, holy cow. I said, I was dumbfounded that she would even consider that. And I think that was 1979 or 1980. And there were the C and the D buildings on the beach. Well, the C building had not been built, nor had the D building been built. So we bought in the C building because the D building wasn't even in the imagination of the developer yet, as far as we knew. They built one building, and it had, I don't know how many units they had, probably 40 units or 50 units in this building. And so we bought in there, and we bought 11 weeks. We bought from week 2 to week 12. And I said, boy, I don't know whether we'll ever get down here or not. We're pretty young yet, and I was still working. But we bought, and then we started the next year. Now, they built it, I don't remember what year it was built. It was either 1980 or 81 it was built. And we started the following year going down because they built it, and then they built we just had a unit. We had a unit, I think it was 204 was our starting unit that we had. Well, we lived in there, we were in there for, I don't know, maybe 2-3 years. I don't even know if it was that long. I don't remember the sequence as far as, and then they came to us and they said, we're building another building, and we're going to call it the Dream Building. The building that we were in was called the Caribbean Building, and we just call it the C Building. Mm-hmm. And the Dream Building, which was for us the D Building, so it was C and D. And most of the people that go there now don't even know that Caribbean and Dream were the two names. Anyway, they said, we're going to build another one, and what we'll do is we will give you the full value of what you paid for this one toward another one, toward the other one. And what I wanted was, after being down there a couple of years, I figured out that being on the end would give us vision down the beach. If we were on the end of the building, we could see down the beach, and we'd have windows on the side, because in the condos you walked in and you could see out to the ocean, but there were no side windows because there was condos on either side of you. and so with just walls, you know. So anyway, they said. So I said, yeah. I said I'd be interested in moving up. So I said I'd like the 5th floor in the D building in this new building. Well, that I didn't get because the developer wanted to keep it because it was right on the end, and there was nobody going to build south of us, so you could look out and see right down the beach out the side windows, and it brought a lot more light in.
Mm-hmm.
But they charged more for that because it was on the end of the building and it had the extra windows. So we made a deal, and so we moved up and we bought 12 weeks in the new building. Started with week 2 because I figured week 1 would sometimes start on January 1st, and I didn't figure we'd be able to get down there because it would be Christmas time and over the holidays. So then we bought 12 weeks in the D building, and we've had that ever since. And along the way, the first week came available, so we bought that as well. So now we have week 1 through 13, and to this day still have week 1 through 13. Just kept it, and that's, you know, and so we started. I think it was probably about 1984, 83, 84. So theoretically, it's been 84, 94, 204, 214, 30 years. We've had. I've had the condo down there for probably, we started probably about 36 years, and the one that I'm in now is 34. Every so often I get to talking to people and they'll say, "Do you own down here?" "Yeah, I own 13 weeks in D420, which is our unit." And they say, "How'd you do that?" We've been trying to get weeks in a row because people had to move every week if they didn't have them. And they got all sold out, you know, and now they just buy a week here and a week there and they have to move every week. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, when we bought, that building wasn't even there, you know, the first one or the second one. Neither one of them were there when we bought. So that's how we started going down there, and Grandma just loved it. She just loved going down there. But she didn't want anything to do with the other side she didn't want anything to do with the Gulf side,
So she didn't care for water, but she liked being down.
Oh, she loved
by
to
the
be.
Water.
She loved being down by the water.
Yeah.
You know, she always said, "I don't care how far out in the ocean we go, as long as the water never gives above my ankles." So she'd walk in the water, you know, down there. We'd go walking on the beach. There's about 7 miles of beach there, and we'd go walking on the beach. We'd walk 5, 6, 7 miles a day up and down the beach, you know, and she just loved it. She just loved that. She just couldn't get enough of it. And man, I thought, holy smokes. The only thing she didn't like was there were times when it got really hot down there, even in the winter, and your grandmother was not a hot weather person. She did not like heat. In fact, one of her characteristics was I bought her a nice leather coat quite a number of years before she died, and I think she wore it maybe twice in the entire period. She just wouldn't wear a coat in the wintertime. We'd go into a restaurant, you know, and I'd be all dressed up in my nice heavy coat, and she'd be going in a sweater, and people would look at me like, "Boy, can't you even afford to buy your wife a coat?" I mean, you could just see what was in their face. I mean, on a day like today, she'd be out. She wouldn't wear a coat. She'd have just a sweater on, and maybe not even that. You know, she was just a hot blooded person that just did not want any. She just didn't like coats. She owned coats, but she never wore them. So
when you guys went down to check out the place down there, were you looking for a place to vacation in consistently? Were you looking for a part of the country or something?
No, we weren't looking for anything.
No, just went down there and
we just went down there. We just went down there because they gave it to us. You know, I thought, well, shoot, what can be wrong with a free week in Florida? You know, if they didn't pay our expenses to get there, but they said, you get there and we'll give you a week to live in it, in this unit down there. And of course, it was off the ocean. And actually, the unit that we stayed in, I ultimately bought because it was on the second floor on another building that was just off the ocean. And we stayed in that building where there were 2 bedrooms, and they had a king bed and 2 queens, and so we just stayed there. And you know, it slept everybody. We could all sleep there nice and comfortably. So we just stayed there for a week, had a free vacation. It was, you know, and at my stage in life, free vacations were kind of nice because a vacation you had to pay for was, well, you had to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so getting one free was pretty nice.
When you were down there, were you vacationing or were you working
Well,
some?
No, I wasn't working. Although I had clients in Florida, I had business in Florida. I could deduct part of my trip to Florida because I made calls down there, and I would go and I had some business down there in my insurance business, and so I could deduct a little bit, not much, but I could get a little bit of a deduction on some of my expenses because it was partial for work and partial for, because I made it a point, to make calls down there on businesses, because there was a business in Janesville that had subsidiaries in Florida, and so I wound up having clients in Florida, and so I would go down and take care of those. But it was, and my mother still lived over in Clearwater for quite a few years after we started going to Florida. She still had her place over in Clearwater, so we would connect during the winter time and go over and see her, because she was down there living, and we were down there living at the same time. But I couldn't spend very much time down there, and I had a real estate gal that I worked with that rented my place out by the week, because that's the way it was a timeshare condo, and so she would rent the place out, but she passed away, and so I had to work it out other ways of getting it rented. And I had a lot of people that I got to know that rented year after year after year from me, and so they would go back and they'd rent the weeks that I wasn't using, which were a good share of them.
So when you originally bought the 12 weeks, did you intend on just being there a couple weeks a winter for a while and then think about?
Yeah, it was the best we could do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just couldn't be away.
So why did you want to buy so many weeks right away? Well,
because I figured there were 2 reasons. Good question. I figured that if I got Grandma to go to Florida, I wanted to be able to keep her there for a while. I didn't want to go down and spend 2 weeks then come home, because you just come right back to winter again. So I said, ultimately we're going to enjoy coming to Florida and spending the entire winter from January till it ran from January till the end of March to the first week in April, ultimately. And so that's why I decided to buy. And I said, the other thing, and I'm kind of like my dad, my dad used to buy property, and he said there were times when that once in a while a piece of property came along that he would like, and he said, I'm really not set up, nor do I really want it right now, but if I don't get it now, I may never get another chance to get it, because property doesn't change hands that much, and I kind of got that philosophy stuck in my head. I said, if I buy just 2 weeks down here, what we're using now, and I could have done it that way, I figured, yeah, sure. Then later on, we're going to want to come more, and I won't be able to buy the weeks I want. And sure enough, that's exactly how it worked out over time, because other people used that method. They'd buy 2 or 3 weeks down there, because you could buy a week at a time, because it was a timeshare. Well, there's just all kinds of people. I have people right now that in fact, even this year, I had a guy that called me and said, I'd like to buy your units. He said, if you ever want to sell 13 units. He said, I'll take them. Because he goes moving. He's got he moves in the C and D building. He lives sometimes in the C building, sometimes in the D building, because he hasn't been able to buy a string of weeks all in a row.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's just, I don't think there's another person that owns down there that got the same deal I did. Just because they weren't thinking that way, or just because they chose not to, or whatever. But, you know, I just stuck my neck out, and it was a lot of money. You know, it was like buying a house, you know, I mean, because you buy, oh, those weeks were like 6,000-7,000 a week. So, you know, 10 of them were 70,000. So, I mean, that was a big decision to make, to buy. But I said, you know, I told, first of all, and that one reason I wanted is because I didn't want to fight getting down there again, because a lot of people move on Saturdays. You know, you have to get out on Saturday by noon. Well, you take your whole day to move from one unit to another, so you lose a whole day of vacation. If you're down there for 2 weeks, you lose one day out of your vacation just moving your stuff from one unit to another. Well, I don't want to do that. And I wanted to go down there and park my stuff, stay there the whole time I was there. I didn't want to move it around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, yeah, I'm going to get what I want. And I said, I told your grandma, I said, hey, I don't think we'll ever probably want to stay down here more than 3 months, you know, at a time in the winter. We'll you know, we got family up north. We go back up north, you know. And it's really worked out well. And the other thing I knew was that I wasn't sure I could keep her down there if it wasn't convenient. You know, it had to be kind of convenient to keep her there. And we had the units. We didn't have to, you know, we had to pay the maintenance fee on them anyway. And so we had them. They were there sitting there waiting for us to go. And so we've got, you know, a few years ago, you know, the last few years of her life, we were spending probably 8 to 10 weeks down there. So that made it nice, you know. So we could just go and put our clothes in the closet and live for 3 months. That's kind of nice, you know.
How has the city down there and the beach and all that, how has it changed since when you were first down there?
Whoa, it's changed dramatically. Because, I remember the gal we had in real estate was telling about her father, that they had lived down there all their lives, this gal, and she was in real estate, and she said, my dad had a chance to buy up and down the beach 160 acres for $1,000 an acre, which would have been 160,000, and it would have stretched, because of the narrowness between the highway and the beach. It would have probably been almost pretty close to a half a mile of beach front. And she said, my dad would be a billionaire today if he'd have bought that for 160,000. But she says we just didn't have the money, and he said it was all grass then. And I remember going down there. I remember going down to visit, and we went to Cocoa Beach on our honeymoon in 1952, because the people that owned the farm where Gene's folks rented a farm over on Highway KK. They went to Florida and they stayed at Winter Park over by Orlando. And so we went down to visit them one winter. It was 1952 when we first got married. We just went to Florida and went over and visited them. And he took us over to Cocoa Beach, because I can remember, because we drove right out on the beach and drove up and down the beach. And nothing there. There was just nothing there. There was a house here, and then maybe you'd drive a quarter of a mile and there'd be another small little house. And it was all grass all along the beach. And we just drove up and down the beach. And he said, this will probably develop someday. But he said, now it's just grass. And that's what this real estate gal's dad said. He said, who will ever develop this? Who will ever want this? Now, they'd sell it for $5,000 a foot down there, on the beach, a foot of ground.
Yeah.
It's 5,000. I mean, they sell it for just, enormous. I mean, beachfront is just terribly expensive, He'd be a billionaire. Of course, he'd had kept it all this time. And I don't know, I think he was still alive when I first started dealing with this gal. And she says, I gotta work. She says, but I wouldn't have had to work if my dad had just bought this land.
Probably not.
No, she said I'd have been in good shape.
Yeah.
Because they're just, but the people, Florida is kind of funny. The people from the Midwest go to the Gulf side. They go to Tarpon Springs and Clearwater and St. Petersburg and Naples and all that strip down, going down on the Gulf side. And that's just that's where you'll find people from a lot of the Midwest. Then you go over to the east side where we were, and you get New York and Connecticut and Maine and the people moving down the East Coast. Carolinas, they'd come down there. And from Pennsylvania, you see a lot of eastern cars there where we are, because the east goes right down 75 or 95 to get to where we are. In the west part, or in the middle part of the state, they come down 75, and so they just were over on the Gulf side. I mean, that was just more popular for people. A lot of people from the Midwest go to the Gulf side, and some people from the Midwest go to the east side, but it's more heavily the eastern population that goes there.
Mm-hmm. Were there certain things you guys like to do when you were down there?
Well, I would go out fishing.
Oh, yeah?
I'd go out fishing, and we just enjoyed the beach. We spent a lot of time on the beach when we were in our early years down there. We'd walk that beach every day, probably for 2-3 hours. It takes you a while to walk 5-6 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's one way, and then we'd have to walk back. Well, no, I think it was no, that's wrong. We'd walk about 4 miles in one direction and come back. So, we walked 7-8 miles a day when we were down there, and your grandma just loved to walk on that beach.
So, if you went out, which way would you walk? Would you go north or south?
We go south.
Go south.
Most of the time, yeah. It was less congested to the south, because there's a Cocoa Beach community that was old. I mean, it had been there a long, long time. And just north of that is where our condo is, and then north of that is where all the beach, where the big high-rise hotels built, because down on Cocoa Beach south, there were a lot of structures already there, a lot of old motels, and they're still there. Mm-hmm. A motel that Jay and I and Dave and your dad and Grandma stayed in. I still go by on my scooter when I ride the scooter down there. It's still a little motel that is right out on the beach, and I remember we went down there and stayed out on the beach in this hotel. I remember that hotel.
Was the pier out there when you started going down there?
Yeah, the pier was there.
It was there?
Yeah, they had built the pier out. And but there's a lot of structures that have gone up since we started going there. I mean, the landscape is changed dramatically since we started going there, because we started in 1981, I think, or 80, 81, or 82, and it's just changed dramatically. And the number of people on the highways down there, when we would go down there in January, I mean, you could pull out to the highway and had to look right or left, because there's nobody coming. I mean, there's no traffic. Now it's just,
It's real busy down there now.
yeah, it's jammed up now. There's just a lot of people all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just people everywhere. And I don't remember when Ron John's was built. When we started going there, Ron John's was a little bitty store right up at 520, and now of course it's a monster store. And so that's the way things change, you know.
I think we got a couple minutes left. What
Okay.
were some of the restaurants down there that you guys went to a lot?
Oh, your grandma's favorite was Corky Bell's. They called it Corky Bell's. It was a seafood restaurant, and we started going when we went down there. She went and got her hair fixed over on Merritt Island, and there was a lady there that had been there and grown up there all her life, and so Wheatie would say to her, tell us about the good restaurants to eat at. You know, I mean, where are the good restaurants? Well, boy, she filled us in on some good ones. And so there was a place called Corky Bell's, and there were two of them. One was down in Melbourne, in a shopping mall, and another one, and it was still Corky Bell's, was out on Highway 1 going north to Titusville. And we started going to this one down in Melbourne because Wheatie liked to go down to the Melbourne Mall because there was a mall there. There wasn't any mall on Merritt Island. That got built after we started going down there. There was no mall there. There were just a few stores, and they built the big mall after that. Well, you know, your grandmother never met a mall she didn't like, and so she just loved to go to Melbourne and walk the mall. Well, we'd go down there, and then she'd go around in the mall, and I'd go to I'd wait for her, and then we'd go over to Corky Bell's and have a meal. Now, the place where we go now, the Florida Grill, which is really the place as far as I'm concerned for seafood, wasn't there then. It was there, the building was there, but it was called Gatsby's, and it was a steak place. And then they sold out, and Florida Grill took it over, and that's our favorite. And then there was Dixie Crossroads, which was up at Titusville, and this lady that did her hair told us, you got to go to Dixie Crossroads. Yeah, you just got to go there. So we went up there. It was quite a drive up there. It was about 40 minutes up there. But the shrimp, when we started going there, the shrimp were just out of this world, you know. And I mean, I didn't care for shrimp. I've just never been a shrimp lover until I got to Florida, and I got the real thing. Mm-hmm. Now I like shrimp in Florida. Still don't care for it up here, but I like it in Florida.
Was Dixie Crossroads the one in the old train?
Pardon?
No. Train?
No, that was called Grandpa's.
Grandpa's?
Yeah, that was over by that. Oh, that was another one that we like to go to, over by right over by Highway 95. But you had to go across two causeways to get to it, and then through Cocoa, because there was Cocoa, and then Merritt Island, and then Cocoa Beach. So Cocoa Beach and Cocoa were separate, and Cocoa was over on Highway 1, over on the mainland, and Cocoa Beach was out on the beach. But their Grandpa's restaurant was way out past. You had to go through Cocoa and clear out almost, and it's still there. And it was in a railroad station. It was in a railroad car. They had some railroad cars. I think they had 2 or 3 of them there put together, and they had a bar there. And but they had, your grandma loved salad bars. She just, that was her thing. She wasn't crazy about meat, but she sure liked salad. And so we would go out there, and they had an 80-item salad bar, and so we just loved to go out there. So that was one of our favorite stops.
Did she like seafood much down there?
Oh yeah, she liked the shrimp. Oh, she loved the shrimp. Corky Bell's, she liked Corky Bell's shrimp the best. And you know what? Their shrimp, the manager told me they brought their shrimp in from Thailand. They didn't even get it there locally. They brought it in from it was fresh. They flew it in from Thailand, and he had an arrangement where they would fly it in there because he had 3 restaurants, one up in Georgia in Macon, and 2 down in Florida. And finally, the one in Melbourne closed up, and then we just continued to go to the one out on Highway 1. But it finally burnt down, and then they built a new one. And for some reason or other, they sold out a couple of years ago, and now it's a barbecue place, and I really miss it because I really enjoyed their seafood. They would give you the most seafood for the money of any place that we would go. I mean, you just couldn't hardly eat it all. So it you know, great memories from Florida. You know, great memories.
Well, and now a lot of the family go down there on their own.
Yeah.
And that's a big vacation spot for all of us.
Yeah, that's right. It's great, I tell you. And it's, you know, everybody that goes there, that's one thing about, it's a funny thing about that ocean landings is the people that go there want to come back. I mean, it's like, and they do. I see the same people year after year. When I go down there, I see the same people year after year because they really just like the place, you know, and it's kind of like, you know, when my folks used to be in trailer parks, they'd get friends, you know, and they'd play cards back and forth and play games with people, play shuffleboard and do things together, you know. Well, this is the same thing there at Ocean Landings. It's just like a big family gathering when they come together. They have potlucks together, and there'll be 14, 15, 20 couples that'll be involved in it.
Now, there are other people from around here, from Janesville, that go down to Cocoa Beach.
Yep.
Was that just a coincidence that they were down there?
Well, there were people that started going and renting our place. You know, there's been several couples been to our complex and have rented there, and they really like it there, you know. And
yeah, every once in a while, if we're down there, we'll run into someone that we know from up here, and I shouldn't know if that was a coincidence.
Oh, I know that they just went there and they liked it. Yeah. I mean, people just, for some reason, they go to that area and they really like that area. But you know, there's everything there. There's entertainment, and it's the closest beachfront to Disney World. I mean, if you draw a line from Disney World to the beach, you'll come right out at Cocoa Beach. So you come right straight east from Disney World, and there you are, right at Cocoa Beach. So it's the closest, straightest route to Cocoa Beach, to the ocean. You know, if you want to spend time on the ocean, and a lot of people do. You know, they go down there, and